Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. Thank you for stopping by. Excuse the noise, there's some chap banging something out there. And I apologize for that. Let me start with macro thoughts. We are winning on trade. We are winning at every level, Trump tells the UN. I got into Hervé, for example, thinks that this is not the case at all. My view is that actually, because they are the biggest taker of goods from China, it puts them in a very powerful position, the US, and actually I do think it's a highly effective strategy, but obviously quite a damaging one on both sides. The Fed raised interest rates a quarter point to a target range of 2 to 2.25%, and pretty much signal that they're good to continue at that speed for the foreseeable future, something that I think the markets haven't fully digested. Welcome to a new era of positive real rates. The Fed midpoint deflated by core PCE inflation. This is via Olga, and this is the first time we've seen this for eternity. After $20 trillion of monetary laughing gas, default swaps and bond yields are completely detached from real risk, sending the most conservative investors and pension funds into uncharted risk levels. That's from Diakal_IA. And that plays to the theme admittedly written 2 years ago when I was talking about mirrors on the ceiling, the pink champagne on ice. And she said, we are all just prisoners here of our own device. Last thing I remember, I was running for the door. I had to find the passage back to the place I was before. It took a long time to unwind, but unwind it will and is. Trichet says there are clearly bubbles in the financial sector. And on the 17th of September, I wrote, bubbles are bursting just about everywhere. The UK is on the verge of financial and constitutional chaos, caught like a frog in the water before it is boiled, according to the former head of the CBI in a stark warning of the disastrous state of Brexit negotiations. Commenting on the snub delivered to Prime Minister Theresa May at last week's Salzburg summit of EU leaders, Mike Rake, who's also the chairman of BT, said, we're on the edge of a constitutional and possibly an economic crisis. The referendum result has already damaged our economy, reputation and influence in the world. We risk being the frog in the water. And it's becoming ever clearer that there is potentially two scenarios which are going to develop here. One is a debacle, a precipitous drop, a hard Brexit, and the other is Jeremy Corbyn. Home thoughts, I was thinking about my grandmother's sister, who was a seller of hats, and I've forgotten what the actual, is it atelier? In the Mombasa Old Town when I was a young boy, and an extraordinary herbalist. And whenever we fell sick, we didn't know whether it was the doctor or my granny's sister. She was very good. And it turns out most of the herbs she was giving us turned out to be the right ones, subsequently all these years later. But what it made me think about was all that knowledge disappeared with her. Believed to be extinct, this is the first time in nearly a century that anyone has seen the Wondi Woi tree kangaroo. Wow. Emmanuel Rondeau captured this Bengal tiger staring straight into his camera high in the Himalaya region of central Bhutan. The photographer and a team of rangers traveled corridors linking the country's national park to look for this rare subspecies, until he finally met this beautiful male tiger. Tigerland was highly commended in the animals in their environment category. Really is a great photograph. Political reflections, let me start with Cato. People are taught to revere butchers, robbers and tyrants under the name of rulers. And the people have little understanding of greatness, but they do have a taste for showmen and actors, Nietzsche. So true, he says, the laughter gets louder. Didn't expect that reaction, Trump says. Look, I concluded yesterday by saying, poking the UN in the eye plays well for him at home, frankly. Bloomberg's then reporting how isolated Trump insulted allies and dismissed the world at the UN. Trump arrived at the UN this week looking to rally global support against Iran and show that his policies on North Korea were lowering the risk of nuclear war. By Wednesday, he made clear he didn't care whether he persuaded anyone. It doesn't matter what world leaders think on Iran, he said after absorbing criticism from America's allies up close, insisting that Iran's going to come back to me and make a deal. The comment was emblematic of Trump's entire approach at a meeting many world leaders used to help narrow divides, not widen them. After doubling down on his America First approach with its insistence on national sovereignty and rejection of globalism, he'll leave New York this week with allies and adversaries as frustrated as ever with the US over issues from trade to climate change to Iran's nuclear program. The world loathes what Trump says, but they pay deep attention to the new credible threats of economic and military coercion. And as I've said previously, I think that's the most effective strategy he's got. It's working a treat. We had fun, Trump said. People had a good time with me. One of the new allegations he made, which is a tremendous plot twist, is that the Chinese are interfering in the US at an unacceptable level. China said, "We have always followed the principle of non-interference in other countries, and we refute any unwarranted accusations against China." China military tensions starting to rise as the trade war deepens. China on Tuesday refused a US warship entry to Hong Kong next month. Worsening trade war, master plan to stop China from threatening American dominance in the Indo-Pacific. It all adds up, says Jean-Pierre Cabestin, who teaches U.S. China relations at Hong Kong Baptist University. It plays into the hands of the conservatives like Xi Jinping in China's leadership that Trump's real intent is to contain China's rise. In China, they're debating how they can respond, and there are hawks who say we have to strike back, said Colin Ko-Suen-Lian. The country's military actions this week are a way of showing displeasure without crossing the line into something more serious. France's Defense Minister Florence Pagny said at its June Shangri-La Dialogue Security Conference in Singapore that French and British naval forces would sail together through certain areas in the South China Sea. The US Navy routinely conducts freedom of so-called freedom of navigation operations to demonstrate its right to sail there. So they're definitely pushing that, we can see that. Japan this month held a submarine exercise in the South China Sea. So I've written about this severally. I think he is using coercive warfare, sanction warfare, currency warfare, all kinds of warfare in order to push back. And I think on balance that he has made Xi look brittle, and I think he's obviously, both of them are betting on the ability of their bases to stand firm, however. Trump on the Kavanaugh nomination, I think it's working out very well, he said. Place your bets. This is from Volatility Whiz, and you can see Kavanaugh fell about 20 percentage points yesterday as events unfolded. And from my point of view, I don't think I'm a prude by any stretch of the imagination, but I do not know any women who could step forward in these circumstances to make these sorts of accusations. And they've got to be taken seriously. And where on earth is this moral compass? And then I like this joke from C.J. Werleman. It's a good thing Bill Cosby's in jail, otherwise Trump would nominate him to the Supreme Court. China, as we said, is blocking a US warship, USS Wasp, from making a port call in Hong Kong next month. We've got to keep an eye on that as well. India wins, China loses in Maldives election. Abdullah Yameen, the pro-China president, conceded electoral defeat today. That was September 24th, but then it seemed to be backtracking a little. Beijing has not yet reacted to the outcome of an election that was widely viewed as a proxy battle for which side the small island republic will take in the two Asian giants' battle for influence in a strategically important part of the Indian Ocean. In September 2014, Xi visited the Maldives and a deal was struck with a Chinese firm to upgrade the international airport, undertook to build a 1.4-kilometer bridge. 2 months after his visit, Maldives signed an MOU with Beijing in support of Xi's ambitious Belt and Road Initiative, one of the first countries worldwide to do so. And then India was worried because they were coming together strategically. China and the Maldives announced plans to build a joint ocean observation station at the westernmost atoll in the north. The proposed facility would allow the Chinese a vantage point of an important Indian Ocean shipping route and effectively open a Chinese maritime front against India. So these were the sorts of things I was talking about. So look, this is noteworthy because Xi Jinping had specifically targeted the Indian Ocean islands at Phocac, if you will recall. Furthermore, it means that India has won a small victory, but don't forget Xi's in Gwadar, he's on the plateau and is in Hambantota. At that 2018 Phocac-Beijing summit, he said specifically, in addition, for those of Africa's least developed countries, heavily indebted and poor countries, landlocked developing countries, and this is the important bit, and small island developing countries that have diplomatic relations with China, the debt they have incurred in the form of interest-free Chinese government loans due to mature by the end of 2018 will be exempted. Previously, I tweeted and asked, does the Indian establishment and Narendra Modi appreciate the chokehold China has over India, Doklam, Gwadar, Hambantota, Djibouti, in the Indian Ocean? Then I read the Vice Chief of the Indian Air Force, the Air Marshal Sri Rish Babandeo, accidentally shot himself in the thigh on Wednesday. 6th of August, I wrote about the Indian Ocean economy and a port race into which the Maldives falls geopolitically. I said today from Massawa, Eritrea, admittedly on the Red Sea, to Djibouti, from Berbera to Mogadishu, from Lamu to Mombasa to Tanga to Bagamoyo to Dar es Salaam through Beira and Maputo, all the way to Durban and all points in between, we're witnessing a port race of sorts as everyone seeks to get a piece of the Indian Ocean port action. China, the BRI initiative, the Gulf countries now appear to see the Horn of Africa as their hinterland, Japan and India to a lesser degree, are all jostling for optimal geo-economic positioning. Overlay the geopolitics, and it's worth noting that the geopolitics has become much more fluid. Fluidity has been engendered by the spectacular arrival of Prime Minister Abiy in Ethiopia, which is landlocked, of course, but a key future taker of port facilities. And I was saying that, the risk with these port investments was the long lead times as they get Hambantota, as it were. This is a photograph of the evening in Maputo I took a little while back. August 2013, I also wrote a piece about the Indian Ocean, and I said then I have no doubt the Indian Ocean is set to regain its glory days. This is a photograph of Ali, the navigator, who navigated us to Wasini Island on the Indian Ocean. Nicolas Maduro, we're landing in New York to participate in the UN General Assembly. I bring with me the people's voice. I come here with a lot of the homeland's passion to stand for truth. And as I've said before, he's at the edge. There is no honest way to explain it, because the only people who really know where it is are the ones who have gone over, and he is certainly one of those. World's most visited cities in 2017, this is from Curtis Shin. Bangkok 20 million, London 19.8 million, Paris 17 million, Dubai 16 million, Singapore 14 million. Charlie Robertson, whose interview I posted last week, says Kenya has a competitive advantage in hotels and tourism thanks to decades of experience, yet Kenya only earns about $1 billion, 1% of GDP, from this. Thailand and Mauritius get 10 times more as a percentage of GDP, something to think about. She's making a big trip to Africa, Trump said. We both love Africa. Africa is so beautiful, the most beautiful part of the world in many ways, he said. Let's move on to the currency markets. Euro dollar just trading below 117 at 116.90. Dollar index 94.51. Japanese yen 112.60. Swiss franc 0.9669. The pound 131.15. The Australian dollars had a bit of a tumble. Where are we now? 0.7225. Indian rupee 72.675. South Korean won 11.12.15. The real 403.22. Emerging market currency a little bit firm after that rate hike. Egyptian pound 17.9185. South African rand certainly got a bit of a fillet from Ramaphosa, who talked it up, 14.2236. Dollar index, this is a chart from T Commodity. Who prefers it to the downside? I prefer it to the upside, and I think it's kind of holding in there. I was getting a bit concerned we were going to break down. U.S. German 10-year differential, and this I think is driving the dollar in a big way. This is from Lee Sachs. Euro dollar 116.91. We're doing a bit of work around these levels. Peter Brandt, who I really think is really good. This is known as a compound fulcrum. Comes from P&F charting. I was among the first to identify the Bitcoin parabola in 2017 and first to identify the CF. Be interesting to watch it resolve, but when it resolves. And then I went back to it as a curve. Each of them feels unmistakably it is the parabola. They must have guessed, once or twice guessed, and refused to believe that everything always collectively had been moving towards that purified shape latent in the sky, that shape of no surprise, no second chance, no return. Let's move on to the commodity markets. Crude oil continues to push up. U.S. crude oil at $72.35. T commodity talking about 74.20. I think one's got to be full on long there. I think we're headed up to $100. This is what Total is saying. I tend to agree. And this is Brent crude, again, full on long, I think. Gold, 11.96 trading. It's done a lot of work. We've been around here for weeks. Emerging markets, rupee rout prompts India to raise taxes on $12 billion of goods. They had to do something. Indonesian's rupiah has lost 9%, but the rupee has dropped more than 12%, and that's a big drop for the rupee. Sub-Saharan Africa, someone tell Ghana that it isn't 2017 anymore. Financial Times, Ghana's planning to sell $5 to $10 billion of debt that will not mature for 100 years as the first tranche of what will grow to become a $50 billion fundraising. The GDP of Ghana is around $47 billion, debt to GDP 65%. No African nation has done a century bond before, and only a handful have sold 30-year debt in the last couple of years. Last year, such an optimistic project might have stood a slim chance of finding a sympathetic ear among investors. After all, Tajikistan managed to raise $500 million to finance a Soviet-era dam project, and Argentina sold a $2.75 billion century bond. It's fair to say a certain sense of exuberance was at large among emerging market sovereign debt investors. Investors are not in the mood to contemplate $10 billion of 100-year Ghanaian debt. It beggars belief, said Kevin Daly, who I also interviewed last week. Really, that was my first response when I heard about it. Really, it's one thing for Argentina to do it, and people were shaking their heads about that. But we were in a much more benign environment back then. In capital markets terms, this is not a moonshot, it's a mission to Mars. Good luck, Ghana, and whoever's advising you. And I was writing about this kind of thing on the 17th of September when I was saying there are no more quaaludes and policymakers will no longer be able to pop them. In prescribed doses, quaaludes promotes relaxation, sleepiness, sometimes a feeling of euphoria. It causes a drop in blood pressure and slows the pulse rate. These properties are the reason why it was initially thought to be a useful sedative and anxiolytic. It became a recreational drug due to its euphoric effect. Bubbles are bursting just about everywhere. Africa's nomadic herders help, not harm, land and planet, says the UN. And this is what struck me. At least a quarter of Africa's population, about 268 million, wow, are pastoralists living on about 43% of the continent's land mass. Mob killings split Ethiopians as political fault lines test Abiy's big tent. If you look at the gulf separating various positions, things look very pessimistic. On the one hand, Ethiopia's challenges are massive, and if the political actors really feel responsible, they have no choice but to negotiate a compromise, or else the alternative is a total breakdown of order. It's becoming not as easy as it looked at first. World Bank approves first loans to Somalia in 30 years, $80 million. Former South African President Thabo Mbeki blasts the ANC for becoming a black party and abandoning its commitment to non-racialism as the debate over land reform heats up. South African all shares down 4.93% this year. Dollar versus rand, Cyril squeezed the shorts all the way to 14.2236. Egyptian pound 17.9185, which are getting handsomely compensated for Egyptian risk with interest rates around 17%. Nigerian all share down 13.81% year to date. Ghana Stock Exchange up 9.84% year to date. Fastjet flags dwindling cash resources may end Tanzania operations. Nairobi has hit back at Dar es Salaam by imposing new tariffs on Tanzanian products like flour, after the neighbouring country ignored a deal that granted Kenyan-made chocolate, ice cream, biscuits and sweets unrestricted entry into its market. This came after Tanzania and Kenya failed to resolve the trade war sparked by use of imported material in goods made in the country, setting the stage for a fresh round of the trade war. Tanzania maintains it has retained 25% import duty on Kenyan-made confectioneries such as chocolate, ice cream, biscuits and sweets, citing use of imported industrial sugar. Tanzania will also continue to levy 25% duty on Kenya's edible oils, as well as the Tembo cement brand produced by Bamburi Cement Factory, which it says are made from imported palm and clinker respectively. President Kenyatta met yesterday with the President of the EU Commission, Juncker. Juncker, of course, is the fellow who gave Trump a big smooch on his cheek. President Kenyatta also witnessed the signing of a deal to deliver 100,000 affordable housing units to Kenyans, financed through a partnership between Kenya and UN Ops. The central bank governor says Kenya's lending rate cap is strangling the economy. Interesting report in the Financial Times. The Kenyan government expected to sign a deal for China to finance the third stage from Naivasha to Kisumu at the triennial China-Africa summit in Beijing, but China balked at agreeing to pay half the estimated $3.8 billion cost. And this is what I was referencing when Andrew Koribika wrote about the raid on CGTN, which happened practically the day after Kenya received that news. Nairobi all shares down 12.32% so far this year. As I've said previously, it dropped into a bear market on Friday, exited it on Monday, and it stayed above bear market levels since then. NSE 20 is down 22.16% year to date, and that is firmly in a bear market. The reality is that any bank today that's not thinking digital will be extinct in the future. The next big revolution is digital. That's John Gachora of NIC Bank. National Assembly Speaker Justin Muturi turns down request by 10 MPs to fly to Tokyo, Japan for the FIVB Volleyball Women World Championship. It's just unbelievable. I said it in another post, the NSE exchange is an ICU ward for companies, tweeted Kiku Lacho. Eulogies for Mumias, Uchumi, Deacons, National Bank, Atlas, Express, Athi River, East African Cables, East African Portland, Home Africa, Transcentury. And now this is what I was talking about when I said bears roam the NSC and the number of zombies grows. That was the article last weekend. And finally, I'll leave you with President Kagame's comment: the markets are never wrong.